a special type in Java, which is a string. And a string is a special type because it is treated like a primitive even though it is actually an object. And it's really not important as far as how that works. What this really means is that you can use this anywhere that you can use a primitive type. It acts like a primitive type. It can be just assigned without using the new syntax, which we'll cover a little bit later when we get into classes. But one other important thing about a string is that they're immutable, which means that they cannot be changed. So when you create a string, you initially create that string, like you can see in this example below. We have a string called salutation, and we have it equal to hello world. If we were to later change that, if we said salutation equals 1, 2, 3, 4 hello, it's actually going to create a new string in memory. It's going to appear to us that we've changed it, but it has actually created a new string, because you can't change a string once you've created a string. And that's where you can see that it really is an object, because if it were not a reference, if it were the actual value, then we would have changed it. But because that variable actually points to some memory location, we can actually assign it to a new memory location. It actually creates a new string. And Java really makes it easy to work with strings. That's the whole point of this, introducing this concept of strings, is that we'll see some examples how you can do some string manipulation in Java, and Java has just made it easier. If you look at the example below, we saw that the easy way to declare the variable called salutation that holds a string is to just say equals, in quotes, hello world. You could also use the syntax of new string and create an object, but Java makes it easier for you, so you don't have to do that, because it's a very common thing to use strings in Java. So let's take a look at some of the things that we can do with a string in Java. So if you remember, we can declare a string variable just by typing the word string, giving it a name. We'll call this first name, and we'll set this equal to John. Now, some of the interesting things that we can do with a string in Java is we can, of course, just print out a string. So let's make sure that we're able to print this out. And we can also, remember, we can't modify a string, but we can add some strings together and it'll create a new string. So I can use the plus operator to actually add strings together. So I can set first name equal to first name plus space Sonmez, and I'll add my last name onto here. Of course, the variable name is not very good anymore, but you can see that I'm adding two strings together to get a third string, which we're assigning back to the first name. In fact, why don't we just create a new string here, and we'll call this full name. So now the full name variable is equal to the first name plus the last name. And if I print this out, you'll see that it is equal to both of those strings added together. Another interesting thing that we can do with strings is, because strings are actually objects, we can actually get the length of a string by calling methods on the string. So we can call the length method, and that will spit out the length of the string. We can see that it's 11 characters long. And we can also find out where a letter is in the string by calling a method on the string. We can call dot index of, and we can pass in a character or even another string. And for this example, let's pass in the character Z. And you can see the special syntax I'm using to use a single character, which is single quotes. This is something that Java interprets as a single character. A string is always in double quotes, but a single character, if you want to treat it like a character, is in single quotes. So we're going to find out what index or what number count starting from 0 would the Z be in this string. And you can see here it's the 10th. So 0, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the last thing I want to show you is arrays. Remember, I had said that arrays are not so important nowadays inside of Java, because we mostly use collections, which we're going to get to in a later module. But you still need to know what an array is, and occasionally you will still have to use an array. An array is basically just a way that we can have a list of a size that we know of some variables, and we can give that list a name. And so I've got an example here where I am declaring an array of numbers. You can see here I use this special syntax with these brackets here. This is the type. This means I have an array type of integers. And then I've called it numbers. And I'm assigning it, and you have to use this syntax of new int, and I specified the length. So the length here is going to be 10. So this is going to create an array of 10 integers. Once you've created your array, you can assign the different values in the array. So in this case, I'm assigning numbers 0 equal to 5 and numbers 1 equal to 8. Now, this is 0 index, so what that means is that within this array, it's going to be 10 numbers starting at 0, so 0 through 9. And I haven't initialized all of them, I've just declared 2 of them, but we can get those values out of the array. What you're using here is a special syntax called an indexer, and this allows you to index into the array in Java. So let's go ahead and print out some values of the array to see what they are now. So I can use this print line again, and I'm just going to print numbers 0, and we're expecting that should be equal to 5. And you can see it's printed 5 here. If we checked numbers 1, we would see that was equal to 8. And what do you think will happen if we choose numbers 2? We haven't declared it here. You see that it is actually equal to 0 because it initializes as the default value for an integer is 0. So that's it. That's an array. You can also notice here that we're using an array already in our main entry point into our application. The strings that come in, this is an array of strings, are the command line arguments that come in if you're to run this program from the command line. Now, one important thing about an array in Java is that once you've created this array of the size of 10, it cannot be resized. You'll have to create a new array and then reassign the numbers in that array. So this is one of the reasons why typically nowadays arrays aren't used as much as collections, which can be resized. You can have basically arrays that are dynamic in size using a collection. But it's important to know what an array is, and occasionally you will still have to use an array when programming. So let's go over what we covered in this module. Now, the first thing that we did is we talked about a variable. I introduced the concept of variable. And along with that, we needed to know about types. So I showed you what a type is and how you could use a variable and using a type to declare the type of variable and assign that variable. We saw how to do that in code. Then I talked a little bit about naming variables. We talked about how important it is to choose a good name for a variable because it makes your code a lot more readable. Then we went through scopes. Just briefly, just to introduce the idea, we didn't go into details in scopes, but this idea that basically variables can exist in different contexts, and you might not be able to access a variable from a higher scope than what it was declared in, a higher context. And we talked a little bit about the primitive types. We went over all of the primitive types, really in order to understand this concept of boxing and unboxing. And we talked about how you could basically think of boxing and unboxing as if you want to ship a baseball to someone across the country, the mail service doesn't ship round, single, loose baseballs. You need to put it in a box, and then you can take it back out of the box and then actually use it. Same concept in Java. And then we went through the basic operators that exist in Java. We didn't cover all of them, but we covered most of the basic ones that you'll use. We talked about strings, the special case of strings, and saw an example of doing some string manipulation in Java. And then finally, we briefly covered arrays, and I showed you how you could declare an array and use an array in Java.